Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. It was around midnight in September 1998. I had just turned 45 a month before. I was at home writing DOS basic computer programs on a 486 running Windows 95 and smoking heavily, about 2 packs a day as usual. I had recently retired from taxi driving and was in the process of having my taxi directory printed and sold. It had just occurred to me that after all my efforts, I would make next to nothing on the materials and expenses. My Japanese translation business had previously failed, and I had no other viable options. For a long time, I was depressed about this. My girlfriend was already in bed. I had been experiencing shortness of breath and dizzy spells for some time. When this happened, I would usually go outside for a minute or so to breathe deeply in the cool night air. Except this time, the spells worked without a hitch. As usual, the episode began with a dizzy spell, shortness of breath, and a little chest pain, accompanied by intestinal discomfort and indigestion. I took a step outside onto the ground-level porch. The sky was clear, and it was a cool evening. I recall this because Venus was visible, and I had recently been looking for photos of the planet on the internet. The air appeared to be clean, but the hyperventilating didn't help. In fact, I was rapidly deteriorating. Sharp pains began to radiate down my left arm and my chest felt crushed, or so it seemed. It was probably the worst pain I'd ever felt. Whether it was the pain or something more complex, I remember breaking out in a cold sweat and my legs turning to rubber. I could barely drag myself up to re-enter the kitchen after partially collapsing outside the door. I was in a panic by this point, realizing it could be a heart attack. Despite this, I kept telling myself it was something unrelated to my stomach problems, but I knew I needed help soon. I grabbed the phone, dialed 911, and somehow got my address right into the receiver. Then I went into the bedroom to wake up my girlfriend and inform her that I had called an ambulance. I sat on a chair in the kitchen and waited for a fire engine to arrive with paramedics to examine me. I began to feel nauseous and on the verge of passing out due to the pain in my chest and the lack of oxygen. They felt compelled to insert a needle into my arm for some reason, but my veins had collapsed. The young man, attempting to do so, was having difficulty. The jabbing was exasperating my discomfort. I vividly recall feeling as if I were about to die. I called out to my girlfriend, who turned to look at my dog. For several years, I had a black lab and grew very attached to her. She was hunkered under the kitchen table by this point, watching with increasing agitation. I was wondering if my girlfriend would mind my dog for me. I recall her expression. She grimaced and nodded. The paramedics were asking me questions, but I was telling them that I felt like I was going to pass out. I felt it coming and said something like, "I'm sorry, guys," before slipping to the kitchen floor. I had fainted a couple of times in my younger years due to a variety of causes. Once, while having my inner ear probed with a metal instrument during one of my examinations into my anosmia, or lack of smell, and several times after giving blood or having blood samples taken while sitting upright. These events were followed by a rapid return to consciousness. It's a strange sensation that differs from sleeping. That night was nothing like fainting. Trying to describe this experience to others or obtain a crystal memory of the event has consistently frustrated me. Unlike many of the documented NDEs, I cannot claim vivid visuals such as tunnels or bright light or conversations with extracorporeal entities. But from the moment I landed on the kitchen floor, I felt a distinct sense of disconnection from my body. I wasn't looking at my body as so many others claim. Staying in my body was no longer an option, as if it had turned into a poisonous vessel. It was almost as if I needed to get out of there. There was no pain. Everything was serene. I was clearly uncomfortable with the prospect of death, and I didn't feel as if my life had been completed, even if it had ended. There was also a floating sensation, as if I were somewhere near the ceiling light bulb or by the door. The reason I say this is because of the return event, which is very clear. This was a rotating descent in which the ceiling tiles spun around and round until they abruptly stopped and I was staring up at one of the paramedics. "Something very strange just happened," was the first thing that came out of my mouth, and I remember him giving me a look that said, "Yeah, right. I don't want to hear it." Then the pain returned, and I remember being afraid that I would slip away again. This time, for good. They were quickly loading me onto a stretcher and into the ambulance that would transport me to emergency care. My companion followed in her own car. Apparently, what happened after I fell to the floor was a flatline, which sent the paramedics scrambling to get my girlfriend and dog outside as soon as possible, while they attempted to reestablish my vitals. I have no idea what they did to temporarily stabilize me, and I never got the chance to thank them. My heart was probably fibrillating for 20 seconds to a minute as I lay there. I was not overweight, but rather a very thin 130 pounds. For several years, I had stomach and intestinal problems, palpitations, and occasional panic attacks caused by work stress, money worries, and other issues. I had been a taxi driver at night for over 16 years. My heart attack was actually caused by a severe electrolyte imbalance, specifically a sharp drop in my blood potassium levels, rather than a coronary artery blockage. My blood K level was extremely low, nearly off the scale according to the emergency doctor. An IV drip and a stomach mixture quickly restored normalcy, and I was able to return home that night with no permanent heart damage. That was the good news, however. It didn't mean I was completely fine. Physically, I had several medical issues immediately following my coronary incident, all of which appeared to indicate a sudden acceleration of aging. For one thing, in less than a year, my hair color went from a salt and pepper mix of brown and gray to a full-blown gray-white mixture. My near vision, which had been deteriorating over the previous years, also required prescription bifocals within 6 months for either reading or computer work. Furthermore, the condition of my teeth suddenly deteriorated, necessitating several costly trips to the dentist. Within a year, I also started having back problems, including one protruding disc that put pressure on nerves in my left leg, causing limping and muscle atrophy. Surgery was suggested, but I decided against it unless it was absolutely necessary. I saw it as a permanent change that would make my natural reversal toward healing impossible. Patience and determination have now restored the health of my back. I can and do mountain trail hiking, as well as lift similar objects and perform similar tasks as in previous years. Psychologically, I began to lose interest in sex after the NDE. This was due in part to my fear of triggering a recurrence from overexertion, in part to extreme fatigue, and in part to severe depression that overcame me. Depression manifested itself as a strong feeling that I was nearing the end of my life. My father had died 2 years before from prostate cancer. Suddenly, I was robbed of the vitality I needed to change my course and save myself from the poverty and toil in which I appeared to be trapped. Needless to say, these feelings did nothing to help an already deteriorating relationship, and the type of arguments we had only exasperated my illness. In retrospect, if I had been able to absorb the altered life perspectives provided by the NDE more quickly, perhaps a revised sense of priorities could have saved the relationship. Though I was not solely responsible for its failure, I did play a role. On the plus side, I was struck by the absolute necessity of regaining control of both my finances and my health, which are inextricably linked. One of my first choices was to stop smoking. The NDE served as a catalyst to impress upon me that what had previously failed must now succeed. I haven't smoked in over 9 years as of this writing in February 2008. The craving has vanished. My stamina has returned to normal, and my immune system has gradually improved to the point where what used to be a seasonal norm of 2 or 3 colds or flu per winter has dropped to perhaps 1 every 3 years. Finances have proven to be more difficult to correct. Borrowing money to return to school for a vocational course in electronics and communication technology proved fruitless in the end. One of the physical consequences of the incident was obvious short-term memory impairment. Apart from embarrassing incidents caused by forgotten names, etc., this hampered my ability to study difficult material and retain details. Despite doing reasonably well in that course, I was unable to find work with its certificate and was saddled with a large student loan that required repayment with interest. I was forced to rely on taxi driving for a living, which I regret. However, that decision was made in conjunction with another to relocate from the city to a smaller location. So from a night shift job to open airy nights in Vancouver's crazy traffic and seedy downtown core, I switched to driving only during the day in Kelowna, the heart of British Columbia's beautiful Okanagan district. I had a reliable car within a week. I'm still working full-time for the same company after 7 years. Though other sources of income would be preferable, my immediate needs are being met and my security is gradually improving. However, it has been nearly 10 years spiritually since the NDE. Its after effects are still with me every day in ways that have taken me some time to recognize. Growing up in a strict scientific household, I was taught that we were solely a product of biology, and that our consciousness stems solely from the complexities of the human brain itself, a physical organ. Despite my reservations, independent thought seems unlikely to result from neuron firings and neurotransmitter transfer across the synapses. I couldn't bring myself to believe in the concept of a soul separate from the physical body. That one night completely shattered my confidence in the soul-body connection. The overwhelming impression of having left and returned was not easily dismissed. Like most NDEers, I quickly learned to be cautious about speaking too freely about the subject. It receives roughly the same level of skepticism as UFO abduction. Having said that, if someone had approached me with an NDE story before mine, I would have most likely suggested it was the result of hypoxia in the dying brain. However, it is clear that documented cases of inexplicable observations made by clinically dead patients have been ignored, if not covered up. And here's something strange. The people proposing to conduct NDE research are almost always, 1, scientifically trained, and 2, scrutinized by their scientist peers. That is to say, those with the most resources to investigate the nature of these events have the most to lose professionally by going out on a limb. In lieu of a rational explanation for these happenings, they're simply shelved as inexplicable. That designation implies that no one other than NDEers believes it's possible to see or hear objects or events in the absence of our corporeal sense organs. But here's the conundrum. If objective, or related to real events, repeatable, that has happened more than once, empirical, that is in your face, evidence to the effect exists, what's stopping scientists from tearing under their precious dogma to find the truth? Isn't that what it's supposed to be about? Simply put, the possibility of such a thing threatens far too many established concepts of reality. To be fair, we may simply lack the necessary tools for the job yet. They claim that NDEs frequently bestow survivors with enhanced perceptive or emphatic abilities. Perception, not so much. I'm still fairly gullible to a skilled con artist. However, empathy has definitely improved. People used to gravitate towards me as a sounding board, which was draining on my energy level, so I tried to avoid it as much as possible. One noticeable difference is a greater reserve of calm in the face of others' distress. I can openly empathize with them without feeling overwhelmed. Often, it appears that people do not need or want you to offer a solution to their problem. Instead, they simply want someone to listen. Cab drivers, like bartenders, appear to have a disproportionate number of these encounters. In terms of death phobia, I'm not really as concerned about the process of dying. True, NDEs eliminate or at least lessen this fear. Not that I'd want to go through the agony of another fibrillation episode anytime soon. However, the unknown persists. I hesitate to speculate on what lies beyond the light, but since all humans must eventually go there, it can't be lonely. Physically, I have the impression that my control center, if you will, has shifted, as if I'm controlling my body from somewhere on the outskirts, almost like a tether, rather than from the center. There's an intense emotional awareness of the ticking clock, not so much in fear of it running out as in the desire to make something good happen. Instead, to at least avoid causing any harm, there's also a sense of frustration in seeing so much of our daily lives devoted to largely wasteful survival. This is especially challenging now that the priceless nature of time has been revealed. However, the antidote appears to be attempting to savor all moments rather than just those of so-called leisure time. To be sure, this is an art form that has had varying degrees of success. I sincerely hope that my small story can be of assistance to someone, and that it lends credence to the memories of other NDEers, as theirs have done for me.